The first thing the Iraqi soldiers heard was not the engine, not the scream of a jet slicing through the desert sky, but a strange metallic growl, a low, mechanical thunder rolling across the horizon like some prehistoric beast awakening beneath the sand. And by the time they realized what it was already too late. In the cold blue light before dawn, as armored columns crept cautiously across the barren Kuwaiti desert in early 1991, the sky above them seemed empty, vast, silent. But high above, flying low and slow beneath radar coverage, a squat, ugly, brutally functional aircraft moved like a predator that did not need speed to kill. It was not sleek like the F-15. It was not elegant like the F-16. It was not fast like the F-14. It was something else entirely. It was built for one purpose. And in the coming weeks of Operation Desert Storm, that purpose would reshape modern air warfare forever. The Fairchild Republic A-10 Thunderbolt II, known lovingly by its pilots as the Warthog, was about to rain thunder over Iraq. The A-10 had not been born glamorous. In fact, when it first rolled off the production line in the 1970s, many in the Pentagon doubted it would survive budget debates. Designed during the Cold War to stop waves of Soviet tanks pouring through Europe's Fulda Gap, it was a machine built around a single idea: destroy armor, survive anything, protect the pilot at all costs. Engineers literally built the aircraft around its weapon, the monstrous GAU-8 Avenger, a 7-barrel 30mm Gatling cannon, so large that the plane had to be designed around its recoil system. The gun alone weighed nearly 2 tons, and when it fired, it unleashed 3 900 rounds per minute, armor-piercing uranium-tipped shells capable of ripping through tanks like paper. The sound it made, that infamous BRRT, would become the last sound many Iraqi armored crews ever heard. By the time Iraq invaded Kuwait in August 1990, Saddam Hussein believed his army to be one of the most battle-hardened forces in the Middle East. Fresh from 8 years of brutal war with Iran, Iraq possessed thousands of tanks, armored personnel carriers, artillery pieces, and entrenched defensive positions stretching across Kuwait and southern Iraq. Saddam expected that if war came, it would be long, bloody, and costly for any invading coalition. What he did not fully account for was the devastating integration of air power the United States and its allies were about to unleash. And within that massive air campaign, the A-10 would become one of the most feared instruments of destruction. When Operation Desert Storm officially began on January 17, 1991, the skies above Iraq erupted into organized chaos. Cruise missiles streaked across the night. Stealth F-117 Nighthawks struck hardened targets in Baghdad. F-15 Eagles swept the skies clear of Iraqi aircraft. But as the high-tech spectacle captured global headlines, the A-10s quietly prepared for the mission they had been built for decades earlier. Hunting armor in open desert. Unlike supersonic fighters, the Warthog did not rely on speed or altitude. It thrived low and close to the battlefield, where the fight was dirtiest and the danger most intense. Its straight wings allowed tight turns at low speed. Its twin turbofan engines were mounted high and far apart to reduce infrared signature and protect against ground fire. Its cockpit was encased in a titanium bathtub, forged 200 pounds of armor plating designed to keep the pilot alive even if the aircraft was shredded around him. And shredded they would be. In the early days of the air war, Iraqi air defenses remained active and dangerous. Radar-guided surface-to-air missiles, anti-aircraft artillery, and shoulder-fired monpides littered defensive positions. Flying low meant exposure. It meant danger. It meant being in range of everything from radar missiles to a soldier with a heavy machine gun. But that was precisely the environment the A-10 had been designed to endure. While faster jets struck from high altitude, the Warthogs descended into the heart of the storm. The first major armored engagements revealed something extraordinary. Iraqi tank columns, dug into defensive berms and camouflage nets, believed themselves relatively secure against air attack. Traditional bombing required accuracy, and hitting individual tanks from high altitude was difficult. But the A-10 was not dropping bombs from miles above. It was diving directly toward its prey. Pilots described rolling in at 10,000 feet, descending aggressively toward columns of T-55s and T-72s, lining up their huge crosshairs and squeezing the trigger for a 1 to 2 second burst. In that brief instant, nearly 130 rounds of 30mm depleted uranium shells would slam downward at nearly 3,900 feet per second. Armor cracked, turrets blew off, vehicles erupted in flames, survivors scattered in terror. Coalition ground forces soon began requesting A-10 support specifically by name. There was something psychological about the Warthog. Iraqi soldiers reportedly abandoned vehicles at the mere rumor of its presence. Intercepted communications described panic when the distinctive cannon fire echoed across positions. Unlike precision, guided bombs that struck invisibly from high altitude, the A-10's attack was intimate and terrifying. You saw it coming. You heard the cannon. And you watched your armor disintegrate. But the aircraft's impact was not limited to tank killing. The A-10 became indispensable in close air support for coalition ground troops. When U.S. Marines advanced through minefields and defensive trenches in Kuwait, A-10s circled overhead, ready to strike enemy bunkers, artillery batteries, and troop concentrations. Their ability to loiter for extended periods, sometimes over an hour, gave ground commanders reassurance that help was always near. If an ambush occurred, if hidden armor appeared, if resistance stiffened unexpectedly, the Warthog could respond within minutes. And yet, the danger was constant. On multiple occasions, A-10s returned to base riddled with holes. Entire sections of wing were shredded. Hydraulic systems failed. Control surfaces were damaged. But the aircraft kept flying. One pilot famously returned with a gaping hole in a wing large enough to crawl through. Another landed with only manual reversion flight control after losing hydraulics to ground fire. The titanium cockpit often meant the difference between life and death. Pilots absorbed shrapnel impacts that would have destroyed lighter aircraft. The Warthog proved not only deadly, but astonishingly resilient. As the air campaign intensified, the numbers began to tell the story. By the end of Desert Storm, A-10s would fly more than 8,000 sorties and destroy over 900 Iraqi tanks, 2,000 military vehicles, and 200 artillery pieces, more than any other coalition aircraft type in the tank killing role. And they did so while flying some of the most dangerous missions of the war. But statistics only tell part of the story. Because somewhere over the burning oil fields of Kuwait, as black smoke blotted out the sun and the desert, became a wasteland of twisted metal and fire, the A-10 earned something far greater than numbers. It earned loyalty from the soldiers it protected, from the pilots who trusted its armor with their lives, and even from skeptical commanders who once questioned its relevance in a world racing toward high-tech stealth warfare. In the silence after a cannon burst, when smoke drifted upward from a destroyed tank, and the desert wind carried the fading echo of that mechanical roar, something fundamental had changed. The Warthog had proven that sometimes, in modern warfare, survival and brutality matter more than elegance and speed. It had shown that close air support, dirty, dangerous, personal, still ruled the battlefield. And the war was only just beginning. By the third week of the air war, the desert no longer looked like a desert. It looked like the surface of another planet. Black smoke from burning oil wells climbed thousands of feet into the sky, swallowing the sun in a permanent twilight. The sand was scarred by craters, littered with twisted metal, shattered artillery, and the hollow skeletons of tanks that had once formed the backbone of Saddam Hussein's armored divisions. But beneath that choking smoke, beneath the ash that fell like dark snow across Kuwait and southern Iraq, the real test of the A-10 Warthog was just beginning. Because the air campaign was about to transition into something far more dangerous, the ground war. For weeks, coalition aircraft had softened Iraqi defenses, hammering command centers, airfields, supply depots, radar sites, and armored formations. Iraqi units were disoriented, cut off, and increasingly demoralized, but they were not destroyed entirely. Many Republican Guard divisions remained intact. Artillery batteries were still operational. Minefields stretched across defensive belts. Trench lines zigzagged through the desert. And when the order came for coalition ground forces to advance in late February 1991, the skies above them would once again belong to the Warthog. Unlike high-altitude bombers that struck pre-planned targets, the A-10's role shifted minute by minute with the chaos of battle. U.S. Marines pushing north into Kuwait encountered pockets of resistance that had survived weeks of bombardment. Iraqi units hid inside trench systems reinforced with sand berms. Some soldiers even filled trenches with oil and set them ablaze, creating walls of fire in desperate attempts to block advancing forces. Visibility dropped, communications crackled with urgency, and overhead, circling patiently through smoke and anti-aircraft fire, A-10 pilots waited for coordinates. When a forward air controller marked a target with smoke or laser designation, the Warthog would descend, not in a sleek, supersonic dive, but in a deliberate, almost predatory glide. Pilots described the moment before firing as strangely calm. The cockpit, encased in titanium armor, felt like a bunker in the sky. Warning tones sometimes blared, radar lock, missile launch, but the mission demanded focus. The crosshairs aligned, the trigger depressed, and the desert erupted. The GAU-8 did not simply destroy vehicles, it obliterated formations. In one engagement, A-10 struck an Iraqi armored battalion, attempting to reposition under cover of smoke. Within minutes, dozens of vehicles were burning wrecks. Survivors fled on foot across open sand. In another instance, artillery batteries preparing to fire on coalition troops were neutralized before they could complete their mission. The Warthog's ability to respond rapidly, visually confirm targets, and deliver precision cannon fire at low altitude made it devastatingly effective in fluid ground combat. But Iraq was not defenseless. Low-altitude operations meant exposure to concentrated anti-aircraft artillery. ZSU-23 Shilka systems, radar-guided Quad-23 modern cannons, spat walls of tracer fire into the sky. Shoulder-fired SA-7 and SA-14 missiles lurked among infantry units. Even heavy machine guns could become lethal threats when dozens fired simultaneously. Pilots often flew directly through curtains of orange tracers, watching rounds streak past the canopy. The sky at times looked less like airspace and more like a battlefield in 3 dimensions. Several A-10s were hit. On February 15, Captain Kim Campbell's aircraft was struck by intense anti-aircraft fire over Baghdad. Hydraulic systems failed. Flight controls were severely damaged. Warning lights illuminated the cockpit. In many aircraft, such damage would have meant ejection. But the A-10 had been built with redundancy in mind. Switching to manual reversion, a backup mechanical flight control system rarely used in combat, Campbell managed to nurse the crippled jet back hundreds of miles to base. When ground crews inspected the aircraft, they found extensive structural damage that would have downed most fighters. The Warthog had absorbed it, and survived. Stories like that multiplied. Another pilot returned with an engine damaged and holes punched clean through both wings. One aircraft landed with a chunk of tail missing. Maintenance crews sometimes patched bullet holes overnight and sent the same jet back into combat the next day. The aircraft's survivability became legendary, not just among pilots, but among ground forces who depended on it. Marines advancing through minefields reported hearing the distant BRRRT before even seeing the jet, and described the sound as reassurance that someone was watching over them. Then came one of the war's most haunting episodes, the Highway of Death. As Iraqi forces retreated from Kuwait City under relentless coalition assault, long convoys of military vehicles and commandeered civilian trucks clogged Highway 80 toward Basra. Intelligence indicated that many vehicles still carried armed troops and equipment. Coalition aircraft, including A-10s, were tasked with striking retreating columns to prevent regrouping. What followed was devastation on a scale few had witnessed before. Vehicles were destroyed in clusters. Ammunition cooked off. Fires spread from truck to truck. When daylight revealed the aftermath, miles of charred wreckage stretched across the road. The A-10's cannon played a major role in that destruction. Precision bursts disabled vehicles at the front and rear of convoys, trapping others in between. But the scene later sparked debate about proportionality, about the ethics of attacking retreating forces, about the brutality of modern air power. For pilots in the moment, however, the mission was clear: neutralize military capability. War did not pause for moral reflection mid-sortie. It moved forward with terrifying momentum. Meanwhile, another mission unfolded far from tank battles: the hunt for Scud missile launchers. Iraq had begun launching Scud ballistic missiles toward Israel and Saudi Arabia in hopes of fracturing the coalition alliance. Mobile launchers hid in western Iraq's vast desert expanses. Finding them was like hunting ghosts. Fast jets struggled with visual identification at high altitude. The A-10, however, with its long loiter time and ability to fly low and slow, became one of the aircraft assigned to Scud hunting patrols. Pilots scoured highways, wadis, and camouflage positions for telltale signs of launcher vehicles. Though confirmed Scud kills were rare due to the difficulty of verification, the constant presence of A-10 patrols disrupted Iraqi missile operations and forced launch crews to remain hidden. As the ground offensive accelerated into what would become known as the 100-hour war, Iraqi resistance began to collapse rapidly. Entire units surrendered en masse. White flags appeared across trench lines. Coalition armored divisions executed a massive left hook maneuver, sweeping into southern Iraq and encircling Republican Guard forces. And throughout it all, the A-10 remained in constant motion, striking pockets of resistance, covering advancing columns, and eliminating armored counterattacks before they could fully form. Yet war is never without tragedy. In the chaos of fast-moving ground operations, identification errors occurred. The A-10, operating at low altitude in dusty conditions, faced split-second decisions. On February 25, 2 U.S. Army vehicles were mistakenly attacked in a friendly fire incident involving A-10s, resulting in casualties. Investigations later examined communication breakdowns and target identification challenges. For pilots trained to protect ground troops, such incidents weighed heavily. The brutal intimacy that made the Warthog so effective also meant it operated closer to confusion and human error. Still, by the time the ceasefire was declared on February 28, 1991, the results were undeniable. Iraqi armored divisions had been shattered. Supply lines had collapsed. Defensive belts had disintegrated under relentless combined arms assault. And in after-action reports, Ground commanders repeatedly cited the A-10 as one of the most effective platforms in the entire campaign. But perhaps its greatest victory was something less measurable. Before Desert Storm, critics had argued that the A-10 was outdated, too slow, too vulnerable in an era of advanced surface-to-air missiles. Some believed multi-role fighters could assume its mission. Yet over Iraq, the Warthog proved that specialization still had value, that survivability still mattered, that there was no substitute for an aircraft designed from the beginning to fight close to the ground and absorb punishment. As coalition forces withdrew and the desert fires slowly dimmed, A-10 pilots returned home, not as relics of Cold War doctrine, but as veterans of a new era, one where technology and toughness combined to dominate the battlefield. The war had lasted just over 6 weeks, but the legend of the Warthog had only just begun. As the smoke cleared over the deserts of Iraq, and the fires of war slowly faded into the horizon, one sound remained etched into history: the thunderous BRRT of the A-10 Warthog. It was not the fastest jet in the sky. It was not the most beautiful. It was not the most advanced. But when soldiers on the ground needed help, when tanks rolled through burning sand, when artillery rained death across open desert, the Warthog came low, steady, unshaken, built around a gun, wrapped in titanium, designed to survive what others could not. And in the chaos of Desert Storm, it proved something the world would never forget. Sometimes the most terrifying weapon in modern warfare is not stealth, not speed, but relentless, brutal precision delivered face to face with the battlefield. The A-10 didn't just fly over Iraq. It rained thunder, and the desert still remembers the sound. If you enjoyed this documentary, make sure to like the video. It helps the channel more than you think. Comment below. Do you think the A-10 should still be in service today, or is it outdated in modern warfare? And if you want more intense military documentaries like this, subscribe now and turn on the bell icon so you never miss the next battle story. Because history isn't just written in books. Sometimes it's written in fire.